Now, Rishi Sunak yesterday unveiled £150 billion of extra spending for schools, hospitals and all the rest of it. Practically every government department will see its coffers swell after the Chancellor's third budget. Confounding fears some ministries would see a funding squeeze, Sunak pledged government spending would rise 3.8% a year in real terms between now and the mid-2020s, up from the 2.5% annual increase envisaged back in March. As a result, government spending will rise to its highest sustained level since before Margaret Thatcher came to power in the late 1970s. And to pay for all that spending, while borrowing will rise, naturally, the overall tax burden, according to the Independent Office of Budget Responsibility, will hit its highest level since Clement Attlee's post-war government in the late 1940s. Do we want to live in a country where the response to everything is, what's the government going to do about it, said Sunak, as he rounded off his budget statement yesterday? Or do we recognise that government should have its limits, he asked, before asserting that government should have limits. But the trouble is, before the Chancellor delivered those lines, he'd spent the previous 40 minutes expanding the state to an extent not seen in this country for 70 years and more. Rishi Sunak contradicted the entire thrust of his budget with a few rhetorical flourishes as he prepared to retake his seat. Look, this is the harsh reality. 18 months of on-again, off-again anti-COVID restrictions have left Britain in a fiscal hole, as spending on furlough and other support measures soared and our lockdown economy meanwhile struggled to generate cash. As a result, our public finances are in a mess. The government borrowed an astonishing £320 billion in 2020 alone. That's around 15% of GDP. Again, the highest borrowing figure since World War II. And this year, too, we're looking at another £183 billion of borrowing. Another huge increase in the UK's national debt. But now Rishi Sunak, egged on by a big spending Prime Minister, who perhaps sees economic management as an inconvenience rather than a duty, has conjured up yet more state largesse, as described by Paul Johnson, Director of the Institute of Fiscal Studies, a model of independence. This really is a big taxing, big spending government, said Paul Johnson. Sunak's plans are more similar to Gordon Brown's than George Osborne's. Another extremely credible analyst, Sir Robert Choate no less, who headed the Office of Budget Responsibility for a decade from 2010, has come to a similar conclusion. Again, Choate is a data-driven, independent economist, an impeccably apolitical figure. The Chancellor is planning for a larger state, said Sir Robert Choate. Hailed by some as the lone keeper of the Thatcherite flame in a cabinet of deficit-friendly populists, Sunak has chosen to repair the fiscal damage from the pandemic through tax increases rather than spending cuts. The Chancellor hopes to have tax rates falling by the end of the Parliament, but will his party have the patience to wait? Now, I've covered countless budgets over the last 25 years, and to my mind, this, dear viewers, is one of the riskiest. The only reason the Chancellor has made his sums add up on paper is because the official UK growth forecast for 2021 has been boosted from 4% back in March to 6.5% now, and with another 6% expansion assumed in 2022. It's that forecasted growth that generates the tax revenues that allow Sunak to fund yesterday's historically massive spending rises. But if that growth doesn't happen, or if inflation forces up interest rates, meaning the government spends ever more cash on debt financing, then our public finances will lurch even deeper into crisis. Full of spending rises then, barely a tax cut in sight, highly dependent on growth which may not happen. This budget was a very long way indeed from prudent. And that's why so many economists this lunchtime, to say nothing of the Tory backbenchers, who will one day help decide if Sunak ultimately succeeds Boris Johnson to lead his party, are now asking the same question. And it's this: was this really a Conservative budget?